As US Marines hit the beach against Japan's Ha-Go light tank, they braced themselves for a formidable clash. The anticipation was high. After all, this was supposed to be a serious threat, but what unfolded was more akin to a punchline than a battle. As the Marines unleashed their .50 caliber machine guns, those rounds sliced through the Ha-Go's armor as if it were made of tin foil. In mere seconds, the fight was over. That day, not only did the tank fail to impress, but Japan's armored warfare reputation crumbled with it, leaving everyone questioning how such a thing could even be called a tank. When we think about tanks in the context of World War II, images of massive armored behemoths charging across battlefields often come to mind. However, Japan's Type 95 Ha-Go offers a unique perspective, a light tank that embraced the philosophy of speed and maneuverability over brute strength. Imagine yourself in the shoes of a Japanese tank commander in the early 1940s, feeling the adrenaline rush as you prepare for your mission in this nimble machine that weighs just 7.4 tons. Light, yes, but also a harbinger of the changing face of warfare. The Ha-Go was born out of necessity. Constructed during a period when Japan was expanding its military ambitions across Asia, it was designed primarily to support infantry and exploit breaches in enemy lines. This isn't your standard hulking tank. The Ha-Go emphasized quick movement, agility, and versatility. Picture driving this petite vehicle through dense jungles or maneuvering along narrow paths, where larger tanks would simply become stuck or struggle to make tight turns. The design team knew that a thinner profile would allow for easier navigation in challenging terrains, making it invaluable for the rapid advances of Japanese forces in campaigns like the invasion of Manchuria and later in the Pacific Theater. Now, let's talk about what made the Ha-Go stand out, and in many ways, what held it back. Many tanks boast impenetrable armor that can weather the fiercest of assaults, but the Ha-Go's riveted steel plates barely exceed half an inch in thickness. It's akin to bringing a knife to a gunfight. From a distance, it looks sleek and agile, but when faced with modern weaponry, that thin armor could only be described as paper thin. In an ideal world, the speed and maneuverability it offered could give it a fighting chance. But against the emerging firepower of the Allies, it often left its crew exposed and vulnerable. Imagine being out on the battlefield in this little tank, relying on speed to evade enemy fire. The tension builds as you hear the distant thundering of artillery and the crack of rifle shots echoing through the air. Every movement becomes a calculated risk, darting behind trees, rolling into ditches, and employing the element of surprise becomes second nature. Yet you're always aware that one hit from a heavier armored vehicle can spell disaster. As World War II progressed, the Ha-Go's inadequacies came increasingly into focus. The rapid advancements in anti-tank weaponry rendered it outclassed. It became a target, not a weapon of fear. The tactical environments where it once excelled shifted dramatically. Yet, the courage demonstrated by those who operated the Ha-Go is worth acknowledging. They relied on their skills and the tank's agility to navigate dramatic encounters, often using its light frame to dart around obstacles and outmaneuver enemies. So, while the Type 95 Ha-Go might not have been the apex of tank design, it encapsulated the spirit of an era, a testament to tactics that prioritize speed over sheer firepower. Its legacy might be tinged with vulnerability, but for many who donned the uniform and took to the cockpit of this little tank, it was functionality and an inherent belief in their mission that kept them going. Each day, a new adventure on the ever-changing battlefield of World War II. When we examine Japan's military strategy during the Second World War, it's crucial to understand the context behind the design of their tanks, particularly the Type 95 Ha-Go. Looking through the lens of history, the decisions made by Japanese military planners might raise eyebrows. They built the Ha-Go as a light tank, designed for mobility and speed, with a focus on operations in the dense jungles of Southeast Asia. The thinking was straightforward. They expected to be fighting against infantry and less armored foes rather than the entrenched armored columns of Western powers. Imagine being a soldier back in the 1930s, standing in Japan's sandy desert training grounds, preparing for what you believed would be a campaign against weaker, disorganized armies. The military theorists visualized blitzkriegs across the rice paddies, not head-on assaults against ferocious armored clashes. The Hargo, with its nimble design, was thought to be the answer to this presumed combat scenario. Its armament included a relatively lightweight 37mm gun. Now, this gun was effective for the challenges Japan anticipated. The aim was to take out enemy bunkers, provide support against infantry, and handle light fortifications. In the landscapes of China and against lightly armed guerrilla fighters, this configuration made sense. Japanese troops, emboldened by early victories, used their Hargo tanks effectively to press forward against forces that were largely unprepared for mechanized warfare. However, the world evolved quickly, and as Japan turned its eyes toward more formidable adversaries like the United States, it became glaringly obvious that their tank design fell tragically short. Imagine the scenes on the battlefield. Japanese soldiers seeking to push back against American forces found their trusty Hargo face to face with an M4 Sherman. It was like bringing a knife to a gunfight. The 37mm gun simply couldn't penetrate American armor, leaving Japanese troops vulnerable to the very tanks and firepower they were unprepared to face. This mismatch wasn't just a technical oversight, it became a death sentence for many. With this in mind, it's nearly tragic to think about the young men in those tanks expecting engagement as they had seen in the training grounds, only to find themselves outmatched and overwhelmed. The Hargo's limitations reinforced a painful reality. Here were soldiers equipped for a war that had already changed around them, at a time when every second counted, and each decision could mean the difference between life and death. This inadequacy didn't just compromise individual tank crews, it reflected a broader issue within the Japanese military hierarchy. They clung to outdated concepts, banking on assumptions about their enemies and the nature of warfare. The war was evolving, but by relying on light armor and underpowered weaponry, they unwittingly set themselves on a trajectory toward devastating losses and strategic failures. In the end, the Type 95 Hargo serves as a stark reminder of how critical it is for any military to adapt and innovate in the face of changing battlefields. Just as we learn from the past, understanding these missteps can offer important lessons for the future. The Browning 50 caliber machine gun, often referred to simply as the Mar-Deuce, holds a legendary status in America's military history. In World War II, this weapon was standard issue on a myriad of vehicles, from agile jeeps and armored half-tracks to the skies strapped onto aircraft. This versatility made it not just a weapon, but an integral part of military strategy, a tool that could level the playing field even when odds seemed stacked against American forces. Imagine being in the thick of combat, the roar of engines and the chaos of battle enveloping you. You're a Marine, eyes scanning the horizon, adrenaline coursing through your veins. Suddenly, you spot the enemy. In that moment, your heart races not just from fear, but from the knowledge that you're armed with a weapon capable of incredible destruction. The 50 cal isn't just about power, it's about the confidence it instills. Picture the first time those Marine gunners trained their sights on a Hargo tank. It's a small, nimble enemy vehicle, but when the Marines opened fire, the bullets didn't just bounce off. They tore right through the Hargo's armor like it was made of paper. The 50 caliber rounds punched through an inch of steel, ripping apart the vehicle's sides, obliterating its engine and devastating the crew compartment in a matter of seconds. It was a game changer, turning the tide of engagements that might have otherwise ended in tragedy. This wasn't just a gun, it was an equalizer. It gave the underdog the upper hand, allowing the Marines to stand tall against opposing tanks. The 50 cal became a symbol of American resilience, a rallying point for troops who faced formidable foes with unwavering determination. They knew, armed with that machine gun, they had a fighting chance. And let's not forget the feelings of those who operated it. Because operating the Browning wasn't just about pulling a trigger, it's about the camaraderie, the shared experience among squad members, and the burden of responsibility it carried. Every squeeze of the trigger felt like a promise to protect their comrades and uphold their mission. For many, the vibrations that echoed with each shot fired were reminders of courage in the face of fear and resolve in the face of adversity. The world may have changed since those days, but the legacy of the 50 caliber machine gun remains a testament to the indomitable spirit of those who wielded it, proving that sometimes a single machine can alter the course of history. As we delve into the early island battles of the Pacific Theater, we find ourselves at the bloody shores of Tarawa and Guadalcanal. These battles were not only pivotal in terms of strategy, but also served as eye-openers to the harsh realities of war. Imagine being a US Marine, fresh out of training, stepping onto a battlefield that seemed as unreal as it did terrifying. At Guadalcanal, the environment was just as hostile as the enemy forces. The Marines, facing the legendary Hargo tanks deployed by the Japanese, were initially left in disbelief. These armored vehicles, which seemed formidable from a distance, soon revealed their vulnerabilities. The US troops found themselves shocked at how fragile the Hargo really was upon engagement. It was a lesson learned the hard way. Beneath the armor, these machines lacked the robustness needed to withstand the ferocity of American firepower. With memories of Guadalcanal etching into their minds, our Marines faced the next test of their mettle at Tarawa. With the sun blazing overhead, the air thick with tension, the Japanese launched a counterattack that could have crippled their positions. It was at this crucial moment that everything changed. In a striking display of firepower and strategy, one platoon relied solely on their 50 caliber machine guns. This choice proved to be a game changer. Picture the scene. The Marines crouched behind makeshift cover, hearts pounding as they prepared for the onslaught. As the enemy approached, the air buzzed with anticipation. When the order was given, those 50 cals roared to life, a devastating symphony of mechanical fury. Each round, they unleashed shredded through enemy armor like paper. It wasn't just the sound of gunfire that filled the air. It was the haunting sound of metal tearing apart, of ammunition igniting the fuel that ignited the tanks. The vivid imagery of fire enveloping the enemy vehicles left the battlefield resembling a hellscape. As the tanks caught fire and burned to their hulls, the Marines didn't just witness destruction. They experienced the psychological weight of survival and teamwork. Each bullet fired felt personal. It wasn't just about defeating the enemy, it was about protecting their brothers beside them. This bond forged in the crucible of battle would echo through history, telling tales of courage, resilience, and the will to overcome insurmountable odds. Yet it wasn't just the victory that resonated within them, it was the understanding of the price of war. As the smoke cleared and the chaos subsided, those Marines stood together on the scorched earth, filled with a mix of triumph and somber reflection. What had begun as an encounter with tanks became a testament to human spirit and ingenuity in the face of overwhelming adversity. So much was learned during these early encounters. They sharpened tactics, alterations in strategy, and more importantly, brought an undeniable human element to warfare, the feeling of being on the edge and the will to survive. These moments of Tarawa and Guadalcanal mark a shift not only in the battles themselves, but in the very fabric of Marine identity as they marched forward, a little wiser and a lot more determined. As we look back at these stories, it's clear that every encounter, every battle, laid the groundwork for the ultimate tide turning in the Pacific. The memories of bravery and sacrifice echo onward, shaping the narrative of a generation. By 1943, the Japanese Type 95 Heigo light tank was a ghost of its former self, a relic on the battlefield. Designed in a time when armored warfare was still finding its footing, it had become tragically outmatched by evolving military technology. Imagine being a crew member inside one of these tanks. Steel walls that were once thought to be impenetrable, now little more than a flimsy barrier against the onslaught of modern weaponry. The Hargo's armor, which might have once defended against small arms fire, became a liability. Stories emerged of soldiers bravely facing overwhelming odds, knowing that their armor wouldn't stop even a rifle bullet at certain angles. It was more than just a mechanical failure. For many, it signified the loss of hope. Picture the dread as American bazookas and anti-tank rifles, designed to shred through thick steel, bore down on these vulnerable tanks. It was like bringing a butter knife to a gunfight, and the reality of that battle weighed heavily on the soldiers' minds. Fighting in the Hargo wasn't just about combat, it was a test of survival against dire circumstances. Crews often found themselves in situations where surrender was not an option. They fought fiercely, determination radiating from their sheer will to protect one another and their homeland, even as they faced the terrifying odds stacked against them. But the truth was stark. Their machines, which they had trusted to shield them, offered little more than a steel coffin. The clatter of shells ricocheting against their armor was not just a sound, it was a harbinger of despair. Each battle was less a fight for victory and more a desperate struggle for survival, elevated by camaraderie forged in the flames of adversity. The Hargo's legacy serves as a reminder not just of evolving military tactics, but of the human spirit that fights bravely in the face of insurmountable odds, underscoring the tragic irony of fighting such valiant battles within vehicles that had long since lost the technological race. In the chaos of battle, where instinct and fear collide, the crews of Japanese tanks faced an agonizing paradox. They often stepped into their steel behemoths, fully aware that these vehicles were less a fortress and more a funeral pyre, death traps that had become synonymous with desperation. Imagine the moment when the engine roars to life, a cacophony drowned out only by the muffled pounding of your heart. Survivors recounted how the sound of 50 caliber rounds striking the hull echoed like hammers against iron. Each hit reverberated through the chassis, a grim reminder of the impending doom encircling them. You could almost feel the adrenaline spike, knowing that with every impact, the chance of a fiery demise grew. Yet amidst the terror, there was an undeniable courage that compelled these brave crews forward, charging into impossible odds. Consider those moments when they faced overwhelming enemy fire, knowing how vulnerable they truly were. They were not just fighting enemies on the battlefield. They were battling the limitations of their machines. Crews often looked to each other for strength, bound by a shared sense of duty and camaraderie that transcended the terrible odds. Each soldier became a beacon of bravery, pushing through not because they believed in victory, but because they believed in each other. Their bravery stands as a profound testament to the human spirit. It's easy to think of machines as mere tools, but these tanks were extensions of the men inside them, stubborn, flawed, and filled with hope even when logic suggested otherwise. With every charge, they cast aside their fears, charging boldly into the unknown, perhaps seeking glory or simply the chance to do what they felt was right. In a world driven by engineering prowess and military tactics, this was unmistakably the human side of conflict, a poignant reminder that courage can often be found even where hopelessness reigns. As encounters between US Marines and Japanese forces intensified in the Pacific, a palpable shift began to emerge within the ranks of American soldiers. With each clash, the confidence of these Marines grew, rooting itself in the stark realization of their firepower advantage. They weren't just fighting the enemy, they were redefining the terms of engagement. Imagine for a moment a young Marine, not much older than 20, standing amidst the chaos and destruction of a battlefield. The distant rumble of artillery reverberates across the landscape, an ominous but familiar soundtrack to his experience. In this atmosphere of uncertainty, the roar of an enemy tank might have once inspired fear, but now the story was different. The Marines started to see the so-called Japanese armor for what it truly was, an outdated illusion of power that crumbled beneath their superior firepower. A perfect illustration of this newfound bravado can be found in the infamous Ha-Go tank. Initially, these small, lightly armored vehicles posed a tough challenge for Allied forces, sparking tales of near misses and harrowing encounters. But as US Marines gained more experience and became adept at using their artillery and heavy machine guns, the tide began to change. Those very tanks, once feared, became a source of humor among the ranks. Soldiers would jest among themselves, claiming that the Hagos were concocted from recycled tin, a harsh yet accurate critique of the materials used in Japanese military vehicles. As they sat around the fire after a long day of combat, the stories flowed easily. One Marine would chuckle and say, "What they call tanks, we call target practice." This launched a chorus of laughter, creating a bond not just among comrades, but also a shared sense of defiance against the enemy. These jokes, while playful, served a deeper purpose, bolstering morale amidst the grueling reality of war. Regaining their swagger didn't happen overnight, of course. It was born from hard-fought battles, instances of reckless bravery, and the realization that their training was paying off. The decisive moment often came when a well-placed shell from a Marine's artillery unit would send a Japanese tank scattering like a child's toy, leaving behind a trail of dust and disbelief. Yet this shift in mindset wasn't just about the physical dominance over enemy equipment, it also marked a psychological victory. The Marines began to understand that confidence could be their greatest weapon. Knowing they could stand toe-to-toe with the enemy's best efforts allowed them to craft strategies that went beyond mere survival. They could innovate and adapt, orchestrating stunning victories that would soon go on to become pivotal in the broader narrative of the war. The trickle of laughter and camaraderie that arose as they mocked the Ha-Go tank became a clear echo of resilience, a testament to the Marines' determination to not only survive, but thrive in the face of adversity. They transformed their fear into confidence, turning each military engagement into a calculated display of American might, significantly shifting the dynamics of the conflict in the Pacific theater. This evolution was more than just tactical. It was emblematic of a growing national spirit, one rooted in defiance and a deep-seated belief in their eventual victory. As Japan faced the escalating pressure of war, the military leadership recognized the glaring deficiencies in their armored vehicles. Enter the Chi-Ha and later variations like the Chi-Nu. These were the attempts to bolster their tank fleet, perhaps a noble effort to reclaim some ground. However, they were launching these upgrades when the tide had already shifted decisively in favor of the Allies. Imagine the feeling of urgency among Japanese engineers and soldiers. Each day they saw images and heard reports of American tanks dominating the battlefield. The Sherman and Hellcat rolled out of factories at an astonishing rate, a veritable wave of steel that outmatched anything Japan had to offer. The standard Shermans, with their well-arranged armor and firepower, were becoming synonymous with hope for the Allied forces, while the Japanese Chi-Ha, despite its ambitions, felt like a faint echo of what was needed. What compounded the problem for Japan was not just creeping behind the technological curve, but a crippling shortage of raw materials and the inability to refine quality steel. Their factories, as industrious as they were under wartime pressure, simply couldn't keep pace with American industrial might. It wasn't just about numbers, it was about the quality and the efficiency of production. Thin-skinned tanks like the Chi-Ha, despite their upgrades, struggled to survive against the cannons of the Allies, which were becoming more advanced and lethal. In this context, the Japanese soldiers who operated these tanks were left in a precarious position. They were brave, no doubt, yet they kept facing the grim reality of their vehicles' limitations on the battlefield. The spirit of the men inside those tanks often outmatched their machines, but in the end, wills alone couldn't bridge the technological gap. As the war dragged on, the sense of despair must have weighed heavily on them, fighting bravely with declining tools in an increasingly brutal confrontation. It was a tragic miscalculation in the grand scheme of World War II, highlighting how innovation under pressure doesn't always equate to timely success. The Hargo tank serves as a stark reminder of Japan's misinterpretation of the evolving landscape of modern warfare. In the 1930s, this light tank, with its compact design and notable speed, was celebrated as a cutting-edge piece of military technology. But when it faced the might of American firepower in World War II, the cracks in this doctrine became painfully evident. Imagine being in the shoes of a Japanese commander, relying on what you thought was a revolutionary tool for quick victories, only to be met with the overwhelming strength of US forces. It's not merely the tank that faltered, it reflects a larger misunderstanding of mechanized warfare. Japan's strategy was built on outdated paradigms, prioritizing speed over armor and firepower. We can draw parallels in our own lives. Sometimes we become overly attached to an idea or plan that once worked wonderfully, only to realize that the world has moved on. It's a sobering thought, how a single symbol like the Hargo represents not just a failed tank, but a broader misstep in adapting to change, reminding us that success in a dynamic environment demands constant re-evaluation and innovation. As we conclude our journey through the life of the Hargo, it's impossible not to feel a twinge of melancholy. By 1945, this once revered tank had become a faded symbol of a different era, a reminder that no matter how brave the soldiers inside, courage alone couldn't shield them from the cold reality of war. America's .50 caliber rounds tore through the Hargo, revealing the stark truth of Japan's industrial decline. In the Pacific theater, battles weren't won by bravado, but by the relentless advance of steel. Unfortunately for the Hargo, it simply didn't have enough of it. The echoes of its legacy linger, serving as a poignant lesson in the harsh realities of warfare.